Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So let's understand what are the key sore points of these amendments and what's the full import of the amendments with special reference to the scheduling resequencing.
Basically, what the National Assembly, the Senate and the House of Representatives is seeking to do by amending the Electoral Act 2010, the 2010 Electoral Act, is to change the order or sequence of election, specifically the 2019 presidential election, by placing an obligation on INEC to conduct the forthcoming election, commencing with the election of members of the National Assembly, and of course followed by governorship, state houses of assembly, with the presidential election as coming last, which is what has generated a lot of controversy because there are two schools of thoughts. One in favor of the power of the National Assembly to amend the Electoral Act to allow INEC to conduct election in a given way. But the point should be noted that under the current Electoral Act 2010, specifically section 25, there is already an order of election. In other words, the sequence of election is already prescribed by law. However, under the extant electoral laws, in reference section 25 of the Electoral Act, you have clearly specified the manner in which election is to be conducted. But the National Assembly, for some reasons, basically political, is now making an intervention to allow the election to come first. The question is, do they have the power to do so? In other words, can they dictate to INEC the order in which election is to be conducted? If you look at the Constitution, the relevant sections of the Constitution, specifically section 76, section 116, section 132, and of course section 178 of the Constitution, the power to appoint dates for election is vested in INEC. In other words, the Constitution has imbued in INEC, has vested in INEC, the power to determine, the power to appoint the dates in which elections are to be conducted. The question is, in determining that date, can INEC be made to follow sequence for elections? In other words, is INEC under an obligation from the National Assembly to fix dates of election based on a particular line of each of election? That is, who has the power to determine between INEC and the National Assembly which election should come first? Should it be presidential? Should it be gubernatorial? Should it be legislative election? That basically is the issue. And a school of thought says yes, INEC has that power, because generally under section 4 of the Constitution, INEC has power to make law for the peace, order, and good governance of Nigeria. Another power.
INEC or the National Assembly, you mean to say? Sorry,
the National Assembly has the power to make laws for the peace and the good governance and order of the country. Another school of thought says, well, INEC has the National Assembly has the power to amend what is already in existence, because, as I have said, there's already a sequence of election under section 25 of the Electoral Act. What they have done is to reorder it. However, we are thinking that by virtue of paragraph 15A of part 1 of the third schedule to the Constitution, it is in INEC that the power is vested to do the following, namely, to organize, undertake, and supervise elections. Indeed, even under section 118 of the Constitution, And even under Section 78 of the Constitution and other sections, the Constitution specifically vests in INEC the power to register voters and the power to conduct election. So we feel that the power to organize election, that organization, includes sequence. Because if INEC has the power to set dates, I do not think that discretion should be fettered by detecting today which of the elections should come first. Because a lot of things goes into organization. It's basically administrative. It is basically a question of policy. In determining which election comes first, there are decisions INEC must make. There are things INEC has to consider. Logistics, resources, personnel, and so on and so forth. So I favor the view that it is for INEC to determine when to conduct election and which election to conduct first.
But in taking into consideration your view, tell us about the 2002 amendment, because it seems it's that amendment that pushed or joined the presidential and National Assembly elections together. And if it's National Assembly that did that, shouldn't they be able to change it again if they want to?
Exactly. That is the argument of the other school of thought, that since there is already an order of election
set by the
same National Assembly under Section 25 of the Electoral Act 2010, which of course puts the National Assembly election first. How come that we are now saying that the National Assembly cannot change what they had already put in place? But you see, the point is this. In 2002, when the National Assembly enacted the Electoral Act 2002, under the then President Obasanjo, there was this Section 15 under that Repeal Act, which stated that all elections shall be conducted in one day. Of course, there was an argument, there was controversy just as we have today, which was fought up to the Court of Appeal. At the Federal High Court, the court said no, that the National Assembly has no power to detect to INEC when elections should be conducted, the order of election, that discretion cannot be fettered. The issue went to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal struck down Section 15 of the Electoral Act 2002. The Court of Appeal nullified it, but the court refused to set it aside on grounds of public policy, because at that time, if that section had been set aside, it would have affected elections that have been conducted, and it would have caused serious disruption in the polity. But the court had held that INEC had the power. That was in the case of National Assembly and President. That is for INEC to determine the date of election. However, in 2010, INEC did something very interesting by amending some sections of the...
Sorry, the National Assembly.
The National Assembly did something interesting by amending some sections of the Constitution which I had earlier highlighted, specifically Section 76, Section 116, Section 132, and of course, Section 178 of the Constitution, by saying that the election shall be conducted on a date to be appointed by the Independent National Electoral Commission in accordance with the Electoral Act. In other words, they made an attempt to subvert the judgment of the Court of Appeal, which nullified Section 15 of the Electoral Act 2002 by saying that the National Assembly cannot detect to INEC. However, the National Assembly didn't do it perfectly. Because if the National Assembly is to fetter the power of INEC, they could have specifically enumerated in the Constitution which election should come first. Because as I have said, if you look at the other constitutional provision, like Section 118, it clearly says the power to conduct election is vested in INEC. And when you even look at the power of INEC itself, under paragraph 15A, part 1 of the text schedule to the Constitution, it is INEC that has the power to organize. What does it mean to organize? It's to arrange for something. So people say there's a difference between date and sequence. It's a logical argument. But what is the point we are making? The point is that under the Constitution, there's a time frame within which to conduct election. Specifically, the Constitution says that election shall be conducted not earlier than 150 days to the expiration of the current tenure, and not later than 30 days. In other words, as long as INEC conducts election within that time frame, they're acting within the law. So I do not think it is appropriate for the National Assembly to detect to INEC.
If you look at appropriation, INEC is responsible, or the National Assembly is responsible for approving the appropriation of INEC. Doesn't this imply that INEC is still dependent on the National Assembly to carry out their activities? And going back again to 2002, the National Assembly determined to INEC how to conduct the 2003 elections by the amendment. Don't you think they again can determine to INEC how to conduct the 2019 elections?
No, let's even put this in perspective. Because even the last attempt they made, the last attempt to set sequence or order of election was not complied with. Was not complied because under the 2010 Electoral Act, Section 25, you recall that in 2015, I think we started with the presidential election.
Yes, we did.
We started with the presidential, but that's not even what the Electoral Act says. It's the National Assembly election that should have come first.
Isn't it supposed to be joint?
No, but
according to the Act.
Yes, but you saw what happened. That you have had a situation where even by precedent, INEC has never been bound
by the National Assembly.
Exactly. So what the National Assembly is trying to do is to change it, because as at 2015, the presidential election was supposed to run at the same time with the National Assembly election, while governorship and House of Assembly was to hold at a later date. So people are now saying, since they had done that, why can't they amend what they have already done? But we are saying that to do so will fetter the discretion of INEC. Because I feel that INEC should be independent. And what is independence if they cannot determine which election should take place first?
And so
you can't really make a clear distinction between dates and sequence. If you say, let National Assembly election come first, what if INEC appoints a date? Appoints a date for all the elections, all the 4 elections, presidential, gubernatorial, National Assembly, and Houses of Assembly, that conflicts with the sequence set by the National Assembly. Can you say INEC has contravened the law? Because what they have done is an exercise of their constitutional power to determine the date of election. So say, for example, INEC wants to conduct in 2019, they want to start with the presidential election, as they have said, with the election of the president. And they now appoint a date that conflicts with the sequence set by the National Assembly. Because the National Assembly wants their own election to come first. What if INEC now set a date that conflicts with that sequence? Can you say INEC has contravened the law?
But what is the implication of what the National Assembly is trying to do?
It is political. That is why some of us are nonchalant about it. We don't really have a stake in which election comes first. It doesn't affect the man on the streets. This is purely politics. Members of the National Assembly are trying to insulate their election from presidential control, because they believe that by setting their election first, their fate will not be hinged on that of the president. Especially if you look at the trend today, that you have a National Assembly that is in conflict with the executive. If the election of the president comes first, many of them feel they will not return. Because if the president is elected, if President Buhari contests, and supposing he's re-elected, they feel that that will affect the possibility of some of them returning to the National Assembly. So they want the election to come first. In which case, maybe the president will be more careful in trying to interfere, since his own election has not been conducted yet. So this is purely political. The National Assembly is acting in self-survival.
And don't you think that the National Assembly being able to come into office independent of the president, underpins the laws of separation of power?
Well, politically, like I have said, politically, it is neither here nor there. You can't really say this is wrong. If you are looking at it from the spectrum of politics, you cannot say what the National Assembly is seeking to do is wrong if the argument is based on political consideration. In fact, that seems to favor it if you are looking at it on the basis of politics. Because they feel that one way or the other, the president will interfere. For example, you have a Senate president that is not really in terms with the president. If Buhari gets a second term, and the election of the National Assembly is to be held after the president has won, there's a feeling there could be interference. So for me, I am neither here nor there. I don't really care which election comes first. And I believe that is the same with most Nigerians. What we are after is the credibility of the election. Issues pertaining to underage voting, issues pertaining to rigging, issues pertaining to what is used to conduct the election. Is it manual? Is it electronic voting? The credibility of the process is what I am interested in. Not which election comes first.
So you agree with leading figures like Atahiru Jega, who say that the National Assembly is trying to whittle down the powers of INEC?
That is what they are trying to do. Because if you are now mandating INEC to follow a particular sequence, you are taking away their power. And I don't think that is in the overall interest of democracy. I feel INEC should be independent. And what is independence if they cannot determine which election to conduct first? What is independence? Because even the courts have said that the question of who has the power to conduct election is for INEC to answer. It's vested in INEC. You had the case of Peter Obi and INEC. And other cases where the court have said it's for INEC to appoint dates for election. I am saying that since the constitution has specifically vested in INEC the power to appoint dates for election, I don't think that power should be fettered by way of order or sequence. I feel that the National Assembly should allow INEC to determine which election to conduct first. But note that if what we are reading in the media gets to happen, that is if the National Assembly amends the Electoral Act, the President withholds his assent, and the National Assembly overrides the assent of the President, INEC will be bound to follow that sequence.
You consent to the opinions of figures like Atahiru Jega, who say the National Assembly is trying to whittle down the powers of INEC?
Well, like I have said, it appears that is what they are trying to do. But really, that power they are trying to whittle down is just a procedural power. It is not substantive power. It is just procedure for election, not the substance of the election itself. My opinion is that the National Assembly may have genuine political reasons for embarking on this. But on the long run, if you look at it critically, I do not think that this amendment favors democracy. Because if INEC is not allowed to determine how they want to conduct election, in the final analysis, you would have, to a large extent, curtailed their independence. But then, let us not miss the point that whichever election comes first, it is not to the benefit or to the disadvantage of the man on the street. It doesn't affect Nigerians. For me as a person, as an eligible voter, I don't care. I am not interested in which election should come first. What I am interested in is the quality of the election. So let the National Assembly allow INEC to determine, to do what the Constitution says they should do. In other words, let INEC be the one to set dates for election and to determine the order of election. But if that is not the case, INEC will be bound. If the National Assembly succeeds, because they are threatening to override the veto of the President, because the President will likely veto it. That will be interesting because since return to democracy or civil rule in 1999, there has never been a successful override of the veto of the President. The only time an attempt was made is the reference I had earlier made in 2002 and 2003, when the National Assembly in 2002, after the President had vetoed the then Electoral Act, Section 15, specifically that said the dates, says all elections must be held on one day. And the President refused to assent to it, the then President Obasanjo. The matter went to court. The court said, no, you did not follow the right procedure. There has never been an attempt for the National Assembly to override the veto of the President. It has never happened. So if they are now threatening to do it, it will be interesting to see how far they can go, because it is not an easy thing. The process has to start afresh, from first reading of the bill to second reading to committee stage to report stage and third reading. It's a long and tedious process that we have not seen before. If they want to do it for the first time, it will be very interesting to see it.
Thank you very much, Effiong Inibehe.
Thank you.